Okay, so now we're going to use the indexing value itself within the loops. This is going to be a little bit of a continuation on the previous section of this tutorial. So we're going to perform an operation within the loop using the index value. So we can actually do this. We can treat the index value I, which we usually call it, or index, whatever you want, and you can actually use this in operations like multiplication, addition, division, subtraction, stuff like that. We're also going to use print statements, introduce you to those, and see how we can combine them to print out many things in a row without having to specify and call in the code print this over and over again. Okay, so now we've seen how a for in loop works, we're going to take the previous idea and expand on it a little bit, actually using the indexing variable this time. So before we just had a simple for loop where it just increased count by 1 6 times. So each time the loop iterated, it increased count by 1, and the loop iterated 6 times, so we got count being equal to 6 by the end of it. This time, again, we're going to be using that indexing value. So let's just set up a for in loop, and I'm going to use the index to be, I'm going to set the index to be I again. So we're going to say for I in, and this time I'm going to start at 1 to 5. So what this is doing, before we had 0 to 5, so we were running 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, and then 5. This time, however, and I'm just going to put this in a comment for you guys to see, so you have that kind of reference. This time it's going to be for I in 1, comma, 5, or 1 dot 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 5, and this is going to run from 1 to 5, okay? So remember, starting value, ending value, and each time the index is increasing by 1. So what are we going to do within this loop? Well, we want to use this I variable, and by the way, this window that I just closed, this is the console or the debug area. So anytime we print something to this console, it will appear here, okay? And I just opened it up by clicking this and closed it by doing that, okay? Just so you guys know what that is. And okay, yeah, so what we're going to do is, let's first start by doing something simple, by like just printing out the value of I. So if we just go print and I, then this will, I just want to close it up, this will print whatever value is in these brackets to the console. And in this case, we're just telling it to print out the current value of I with each iteration. Okay, so before we take a look at the console, let's think about what we're going to have happen. Well, I mean, it's too late now, you kind of have already seen it. So we see we get 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5 being printed out. Now, why do you think that is? We haven't actually specified what values it should print out. Well, actually we have in a way, because we've told it to print out I, and I with each iteration is taking on a new value. So that's why we get 5 different values here. So for the first iteration, we've specified that I should equal to 1, and we're guessing each time we're having the loop print out whatever the current value of I is. So the first time the loop iterates, we'll have I equaling 1, so we'll print out 1. The second time we'll have I equaling 2, because it will be the second iteration and I increases by 1 each time, so I will be 2, so we'll print out 2. With the third iteration we'll have it be 3 and 4, and finally up until the fifth and the last iteration which we specified, and it will be 5, so it will print out 5. Okay, and that's why we get the values 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5 being printed out. If we start this at 0, let's see how it changes. And don't worry about that. So let's start this again and we'll run it. And you see there we get 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. What if we printed all the way up until 100? Well, there we go. You see in the console there, we get all of the values from 0 to 100 being printed out. Okay, so this can be very useful when you want to print out stuff like, for example, character arrays. That's where these for loops come in really handy. Like, for loops and arrays go really well together because it's a great tool to iterate through an entire array. But that's something that we'll look at in the next part. For now, we're just kind of breaking you into the concept of the for in loop. Okay, so now we've just printed out an I, so we've seen how this works each time. I'm going to reset this back to 5 and 1. And now we're going to do something with this indexing value other than just print it. So I'm just going to comment this out for now because we might want it later. And all we're going to do is we're going to create this variable. Actually, I'm going to create it up here. I'm going to call this count. It's going to be a type int, and I'm just going to give it the value of 0 to start off with. So in fact, let's not give it a value. Let's just leave it as this value, or this variable that doesn't yet have a value, so it'll have the value of nil. Okay? And we're going to assign it the value down here, so that's fine. We can leave it as the optional variable up here. So what we're going to do is we're going to say count equals I times 2. So what's going to happen is with each time the loop iterates, we're going to first execute this line, then we're going to print out, I just want to print out the value of count. Okay, so what we're doing is each time this runs, we're assigning the value of count to be whatever the current value of index is times 2. Okay, so again, indexing starts at 1, so it'll be 1 times 2 the first time around. Second time around will be 2 times 2, then 3 times 2, then 4 times 2, and then finally 5 times 2. Okay, and because we are printing out with each iteration of the loop, it will print out 5 different numbers. If we were to print out at the end, however, we would get 10. Okay, and that's because we're not printing out with each step, but I'm just going to print out with each step just to see. And just so you know, because we declared this to be an optional variable, it says optional 2, 4, 6, 8, and 10. If we declared this to not be optional and just gave it a value right away, then we just get 2, 4, 6, 8, 10. Okay, so that's an example of how we can use the indexing within the loop itself. So this will be very useful again for dealing with arrays and stuff, which we'll look at in just a little bit. But just be wary that you can treat this I, or whatever you want to call this, you call this index if you want to be more specific, but just keep that in mind that we can use this and treat it as any kind of variable and use it in stuff like operations. We can use it to call functions, call indexes on arrays, and stuff like that. Okay, so just one of the many things that you can do with these for-in loops. Like I said, this next part coming up will be on arrays, and you'll see why arrays and for-in loops go so well together. So this part of the tutorial involved using indexing within the loop itself. So this was taking the current count of I, which with each iteration will increase by 1, and we just took that and we multiplied by 2 each time. Okay, so we had loops running from, well, first from 0 to 5 and then from 1 to 5, and we took the value I each time and we just multiplied it by 2 and then had it print out. And yes, we introduce you to print statements to print out the value of count each time, and this is a great way to print out many things if you have many numbers to print out in a row. The for loop might be, or a for-in loop might be a very good way to do it. Okay, so basically we started at 1, ran till 5, so indexing will start at 1, and we just took that, multiplied by 2 each time, so we had first 1 times 2, then the next iteration index was 2, so we had 2 times 2, then 3, then 4, and finally we specified it to finish at 5, so we ended up with 5 times 2. Okay, so that's one way you can use indexing within a loop. This time we'll be looking at arrays and loops.